got the legal expertise here. We have the corporate expertise over there, and I'm excited to dive into that. Thank you to Andrea. If you don't know Andrea Coyne, she's really the one who put this all together. And there's a big thank you. So thank you. And thanks to you guys for coming out. Looking forward to this. I am going to read off the script for our bios because they are so impressive. I don't want to miss anything. So bear with me while I go through this. First, we have Tim Charlesworth. He's a shareholder and attorney in the firm's corporate business and banking group. His practice includes international business law, distribution and agency relationships, technology licensing, joint ventures, sales transactions, contracts, and commercial law. And he frequently teaches classes and speaks about subjects related to cross-border commercial law, exporting, and compliance topics. So I couldn't think of a better person to be here on this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Then we have Elyse Pillitteri. She is a shareholder in the firm's corporate business and banking, M&A, and intellectual property groups. Her practice primarily focuses on assisting clients with a variety of commercial transactions, including business entity formation and structuring, capital raises, shareholder relations, employee equity grants, asset and stock purchases, and general contracting, drafting, and basically a business we should be talking to. She routinely assists clients in protecting their valuable IP and negotiates contracts with IP components, including software licensing agreements. So, Elyse, thank you very much for being here. Jen Goodwin. Jen has an extensive background in commercial and financial transactions, healthcare law, and international business law with proven ability to negotiate complex transactions. She's currently serving as senior counsel at Victaulic Company, the leading producer of mechanical pipe joining solutions with over 50 global facilities and 4,000 employees worldwide. So like I said, we got the legal expertise here, and we really have, people who are in it over there. So, really looking forward to hearing more. She is responsible for management of the global environmental group and global real estate portfolio, international business transactions, including distribution relationships and employee matters, commercial transactions, and select international domestic product liability litigation. So, Jen, thank you very much for being here. Kendra Eden is a transactional attorney with a background in corporate real estate and healthcare law. She has experience in negotiating complex transactions and providing strategic legal advice to bring a results-driven approach to complex legal issues. As corporate counsel at Olympus, a global medical technology company, she provides critical legal guidance that supports innovation and compliance in the fast-paced, highly regulated life sciences sector. I think that highly regulated will be important, and so I'm excited to dive into that. Last but not least, least in this instance. There's me, Jimi. I'm the president of YMI Insurance. I did an undergrad at Villanova, which I don't know if you know is the only American institute to produce hope, so that's a pretty big deal. And I did my MBA at Columbia University, practiced equity research at Homeowners Trust for a while before joining the family business and taking over as president of YMI Insurance, where we practice commercial insurance. I also run the YMI Club and podcast where we talk to business owners and business people in the area about their businesses. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And my first question is the whiplash of headlines has been very difficult to keep up with. Even today, we saw that there was an agreement reached for a pause between the U.S. and China. What advice are you giving clients, or what steps are you taking to deal with the uncertainty in the back and forth? Anybody?
I'll jump in, I guess. The latest news, many people are saying that as of Friday, Trump is eliminating all tariffs from anywhere. That's what many people are saying, but it doesn't mean it's true. That's my joke of the day. When he says many people are saying, you can't trust it. People are, I think for the most part, what I see is sitting and waiting and hoping for the best, which is not a great strategy, but most of our clients are smaller and medium-sized businesses, and they don't like the idea of spending a lot of money on either legal fees or on setting up new manufacturing in another country to try to avoid the tariffs. But that is what some companies are doing. We're working with some who are actually doing that now, examining whether they can stop manufacturing in the U.S., maybe move it to Europe so that they can actually import their finished goods to China, which is where a big part of their market is. And other companies are doing similar things. They're shopping around for that low tariff location where there's manufacturing abilities. Maybe they're going to get into a joint venture there. Maybe they already have some manufacturing relationship there. Makes it easier. That's one way of approaching it. Another is looking at your contracts, making sure that you actually have a contract, seeing if there's a way that you can use the contract language to your advantage. Perhaps you can say that the tariffs are an event of force majeure like COVID. I think that's probably a stretch in most cases, but if you look at the language of the contract, maybe you can do it. And I'll stop there and pass it on and see if anybody else has comments so I don't monopolize things.
Yeah, I'd say that you're able to draft contract provisions that give you flexibility to address, whichever way the situation goes, whether it's price adjustments, like Tim mentioned, specifically tailored force majeure provisions. There are ways to draft your contracts to address, however this ends up. And, certainly speaking with your general counsels or outside counsels to review, the form contracts that you enter into. And then it could just be a simple, couple hour exercise to draft the appropriate provisions that can protect you.
Yeah, to jump on that. So as in-house counsel for a company who is dealing with this daily, my best advice is find a good, strong outside counsel and ask them for what you want, right? So do you want, a weekly update of here's what's gone on, right? Do you want, somebody who's calling you and saying this is the change of the day? Do you just want somebody who's going to be available when you call them? So find somebody who's going to be there for you to help you through the situation, because that's critical, because you cannot do this on your own. You can't do, you're running a business, your people are running a business. If you already have counsel, they're dealing with a ton of different things. I mean, Victaulic's a huge company. We only have 5 in-house counsel. We're dealing with all sorts of fires everywhere else. None of us are focusing on this. So we reach out to our counsel and say, okay, what's going on? They send us updates. They send us, we're doing that type of work to make sure that we're kind of understanding what's happening. Some other things that we're looking at, right? Diversifying supply chain, right? Obviously, like joint ventures or different groups that you can deal with, but diversify supply chain. If you haven't done that already, try to make sure that you're getting supplies from different locations if you can, if it becomes too expensive to get it from one location, or if you've just got one supplier who just says, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. We've had that. I think, looking forward in the future, right? Any ability for future contracts to allocate your tariff risks, right? So you might be stuck today, but going forward, as you negotiate contracts, see where you can potentially try to allocate some risk so that you're dealing, from today, try to work that in so that maybe your force majeure or some other provision doesn't protect you now in an existing contract, but moving forward, you write something in that could work for you.
Jenna, would you try to just kind of bury that in the contract and say that all taxes are the responsibility of X, and then when it comes up, you say, well, you said you were going to pay for it?
So we don't tend to do that. I don't tend to do that. So, a lot of times, right, my approach has always been that we try to be fair. I don't try to force contracts down on people, because if I get somebody who's just going to sign a contract, it generally means they didn't read it, they don't understand the terms, and when it comes time to actually enforce it, they're probably not going to be able to live up to the terms that they agreed to.
And then you have a fight anyway.
And so I'd rather address it. And so, we go through our contract templates, we'll write additional terms in. We're not burying it in a little sentence somewhere in fine print. We're going to, likely put it in there, and we might not call it out and say tariffs, right, in bold print, but it'll be something that indicates that this is a change. So
I would kind of echo what you've said, but kind of two pieces, right? Know where you stand today, understand, your supply chain, understand what your contracts say, what your rights are, what options and flexibility, so that as we navigate the uncertainty, hopefully you have a trusted partner who's kind of giving you those updates. You know what your options are as of today, and exactly what you said, Jen. Take stock of what your options are. What options do you want right now? You know, what options don't you have that you can take lessons learned from this instance, and you know you're going to continue to have lessons as we weather this storm. But take stock of those to improve your contracts, improve your templates, and whatever that looks like for you and your business's supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a big wake-up call along those lines. Nobody ever paid attention to that paragraph near the end of the contract, force majeure. You use the same thing for 20 years, nobody paid attention to it at all until COVID hit. And then you think, well, is this a man-made condition? Is it a natural condition? I don't know. Depends on which version of the news you believe. And now, if you can't read a paragraph, it doesn't have the word pandemic in it.
Yep.
So it was a wake-up call in a lot of ways. Finding diverse suppliers, as you said, Janice. The aluminum and steel tariffs back in the first Trump and Biden administrations, that was another wake-up call for a lot of companies. All of a sudden, another 25% or whatever it was hard. Yeah.
I'm curious, hearing the need for flexibility. Have you seen companies renegotiating contracts in light of this? And what have those conversations look like?
Yes, I mean, particularly with clients that have historically entered into long-term agreements. Ideally, what we like to see in those contracts is, to the extent there's a change in law, might not specifically call out the tariffs. It allows a party, for instance, to submit a change order, come back to the negotiating table, and attempt to renegotiate pricing. On that point, though, I will say, while not every historical contract says that, what I would like to see going forward is, particularly with these long-term engagements, is, to the extent you're impacted by the tariff and you're the one that's going to be facing that price hike, you want to add an ability to exit if you don't reach an agreement within a certain period of time. That's critical.
Sure. So, Tim, over the past 3 decades, you've seen the evolution of global trade policy. How changes in tariffs and trade wars shape the legal strategies companies use?
Well, I guess when I first started practicing and up until recently, the main themes of international business were free trade, global sourcing, lowering barriers to trade, the lower tariffs, not having so many non-tariff obstacles in place. Clients had to deal with things such as local licensing and registration requirements that usually they could get through those hurdles unless the country was actively trying to keep them out of the market, which is another story. There might have been a requirement that you have some local ownership for your company or a local agent importing your products. There may have been, I had another note on this one that I was thinking about. Protectionist laws in the country that you were targeting to try to promote the domestic industry over yours, which is kind of what we're seeing now on the flip side. We're trying to protect American business by preventing foreign companies from delivering their stuff to the U.S. But those were the exception, not the rule. So now it has become, at least for the moment, it is the rule. It's not business as usual at all.
And Elyse, how can well-structured contracts, touch on this a little bit, but how can they mitigate the risks posed by sudden tariffs or trade barriers?
Yeah. So what I'd say on that is pretty much any business risk can be mitigated by a contract. Your lawyers just need to know what those business risks are. And I mean, we can certainly, now everybody's talking about tariffs, and what I'll just say is that, relying on the boilerplate contract provisions like force majeure, common law principles like force majeure aren't going to cut it when you're dealing with somebody that sophisticated. Courts routinely have found, even during COVID, that economic hardship wasn't a sufficient basis for force majeure. All those types of provisions, material adverse change, they need to be specifically drafted. You need to get your attorneys involved to call out the specific risks so that it can be mitigated.
I'm guessing that your companies don't buy a single nut or bolt without some kind of contract document, even if it's just an invoice and terms and conditions.
You'd be guessing wrong.
Okay, now it sounds like our clients.
For the majority, yes.
Okay.
But it does happen. Other than, right, invoice and purchase order terms and conditions, right? So there are times that we revert back to the old battle of the forms argument and say, all right, if we don't have a contract in place, or we've had such long-standing contracts in place that one could try to make the argument that despite the fact that it's expired by its terms, that we're still, ordinary course of business, and it still applies. And we have a few customers that are like that. We have a list that gets circulated every week that we address and try to address. But yeah, look, we have the terms and conditions. Some take months to negotiate. Everybody, it's not, it's not 100%.
And to the question I asked before, you guys have all these contracts, some older, some newer. Has this forced you to look at those contracts and reassess them and maybe renegotiate them? What does that look like?
On a case-by-case basis, it's too difficult to just, our supply chain team is trying to keep up on a daily basis with just making sure we have the supplies, making sure that we, have everything that we need, let alone to now go back and try to renegotiate. So as things come up, they triage, more so than, we unfortunately don't have the staff to be able to say, okay, let's take a look at all of these and see, right? But they triage and they look, and so at times, right, they'll pick a segment, and say, okay, what do these say? What do we need to do? What area are we potentially vulnerable in? And do we need to do better? Do we need to find other suppliers in other areas, and kind of shift some of their focus in that direction? But, it's an ever moving target, and, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah. Kendra, I hinted before that it's a very regulated industry that you work in. What has the impact, of tariffs been on something like that?
Sure. So, I work obviously in the life sciences industry with medical technology and devices, but in any highly regulated industry, you've got it's going to add a level of complexity to your supply chains just generally. You've got quality standards that you need to meet, safety requirements that you need to follow, pre-market approvals from the FDA that have certain requirements, and it just adds a level of complexity and nuance to your supply chain. Additionally, when we talk about who's bearing the increased costs, right? When you're in the medical space, the payment looks different, right? If your end customer is a hospital or a doctor's office, the payment is going to be different. Same thing if the patient is the end consumer of your product. So, you've got perhaps government contracts with fixed pricing, or GPOs and IDNs with fixed pricing, or the added layer of insurance reimbursement at a fixed rate. So who's bearing those costs just looks a little bit more complex. And also, when we talk about the life sciences space, growth happens through innovation. And when dollars are going to increase costs over here, you've got less in the pot. Does that mean that innovation, R&D, do those things suffer? Hopefully not, but it's an added nuance to these more highly regulated industries.
That's great. So, what are some of the legal pitfalls that businesses face when trying to navigate international trade regulations?
Where to start? Honestly, the biggest pitfall that we see is not having any contract at all and just relying on a personal relationship, which is great to have a good personal relationship with your supplier or your distributor or whoever. In case you hit hard times, you can probably negotiate your way out of it. But you want to have a fallback in case something bad happens, or if your distributor gets bought by somebody else and you lose that personal relationship, have a contract you can fall back on. That's number one. Number two is people get complacent, I think, about checking that they're in compliance with import or export regulations, and specifically having to do with tariffs. There are three factors: the valuation of the products or the valuation of the goods being imported, the country of origin, and the classification. The classification is the one that gets messed up, I think, most frequently. Some companies do their own classification and they're pretty good at it. They have experience. Some wing it. Others rely on their customs broker to tell them what they think it is, but the contract with the broker always says, we're not responsible if there's a mistake, it's on you. So it's good to have that checked by someone who's technically proficient and knows how to classify your products, or you submit a request to the government to let them classify it for you, and then you're pretty much stuck with it. But that might affect your tariff rate. If you're in the wrong classification, you might be paying 20% when really you only owe 10. Or it could go the other way too, so you could end up whipsawing yourself. But those are things that are relatively easy to do. As Jen said, you don't always make the time to do it because your resources are going elsewhere. But now's the time. I think it's worth the effort to check those things. Make sure you got the right country of origin, because just because it's shipped from Canada doesn't mean Canada is the country of origin. It might be Israel, for all you know, and it might be a free trade agreement that you can take advantage of. So those are some biggies.
Yeah. Jen and Kendra, just piggybacking on that, I mean, I'm sure you have hundreds of suppliers across countries. How do you find managing those aspects of the supply chain?
Well, fortunately, we have a whole supply chain group that does that. So the legal department does not do that, but it's challenging. I mean, it's really challenging. And, you've got to, I mean, that group is extensive. And, some of the things that Tim just talked about with regards to, import, export, we face and we've had challenges with, and we've had to struggle through country of origin. Our products we manufacture in China, we manufacture in Mexico, we manufacture in Poland, and so we're importing from a couple different countries, just our products that we manufacture, let alone third-party sourcing. And so you have this issue of, where is it coming from? And you believe it might be coming from somewhere, but it's coming from somewhere else. And so getting a good handle on that is really good, because if you get questioned on it, it's a really long and painful process.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
And your record keeping is really important to make sure that you can demonstrate that you made a good faith effort to get the right answer. If you mess up and it's an honest mistake, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. If you mess up on purpose to get that lower rate, that's trouble.
100%.
You can go to jail for things like that. So you don't want to do it.
Yeah. No.
I would say similar. Olympus has dedicated teams to kind of managing the supply chain and trade compliance in terms of that flow. But I think to echo those points, we're triaging when these issues come up, but it's important to take stock. It's important to have the right people, depending on how large your company, maybe that's a team, maybe it's just a person, but to understand kind of what are the country of origin issues, what are the Incoterms and things like that when you're importing and exporting.
Well, and this could be a great spot too to get that outside legal advice where they just say, not to turn it over and say, okay, you do it, but to say, okay, what are the 3 things, the 5 things, the 10 things that I should be focusing on here? Like, I'm a small business and I don't have a whole staff of people to do this, but I need some help. Or, is there a group that I can go to, or find somebody who can advise you in that space to help you. So at least you can show that you made the good faith effort to do it, as opposed to just being like, well, I didn't know. And then you step back and, government comes in and
Yeah. The Small Business Development Center at Lehigh University does seminars periodically on compliance. There are other resources out there. The government puts them on. Some of them are pretty low cost. Some are free. Some are expensive. But you need to be educated and show that you did your due diligence just in case something goes wrong.
Elyse, have you seen a shift in client priorities or contract terms, as these trade disruptions are happening? And if so, back to kind of Joan's point, how are you advising them to adapt?
I mean, absolutely. We've seen a shift. Clients are trending toward shorter term agreements. The clients who have the financial wherewithal, some are stockpiling raw materials to avoid potential price or tariff increases. What I recommend to clients is to get that tariff issue out of the, iron it out of the gate with potential counterparties. I think it makes sense to put in potential contract provisions in your LOIs, your term sheets, to figure out how you're going to handle the tariff issue at the outset, rather than, rack up fees and expenses negotiating those provisions and potentially have the relationship fall apart. And then for existing clients that are locked into long-term arrangements, I would say, and they need a potential out, is to scour what the contract provisions say and take stock of what you have. Just because something doesn't mention tariffs doesn't mean you may not have an out, doesn't mean that you may not get negotiating leverage from certain existing contract provisions. So that's how I'm advising clients that enter the door.
Mm-hmm.
Kendra, what's one thing global business and local businesses honestly can and should do to safeguard themselves and ensure business continuity?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a lot, and it's at the forefront because of what's happening in the news right now. It's sometimes an expensive thing. It's not something that we want to do, and often it's not something we have the time to do. But improving your templates, improving your contract language, it is an appropriate action to take, whether that is looking at lead times and what penalties might be if your supplier's not meeting them, if it's pricing increases and what happens when this lovely relationship that you're so excited to enter into or has been working well so far, what happens when you're trying to renew that contract and relooking at those terms. Bad things happen all the time. We've seen it with COVID. Now we're seeing it here in this tariff climate. Let's talk about what price increase looks at and spending time during the negotiating process. As Tim mentioned, it feels really easy to say all the stuff in the second half of the contract that doesn't have the numbers in it. That doesn't really matter. Does that really matter? Things feel good right now. We want to get this deal done. We want to shake hands. But they do matter, especially if you're entering into long-term agreements or creating supply chains that are complex and going to rely on each other, and so taking the time and care to negotiate those well on the front end is going to save you the headaches on the back end.
Yeah, we have a client, if I can think of based on what you said, who's represented in the room today, who routinely lets us know when something goes, I won't say wrong, but differently in a project than they expected. And they asked us to tweak paragraph 17 to fix that so it doesn't happen again. And that happens every couple of months. Something comes up that's different than what they expected. We help them draft around it to address that problem, and that's how it should work. It should be an evolution because new things are happening.
Absolutely.
So yeah, negotiations, sometimes go sideways. Jen, do you have, a lesson that you've learned from negotiating that maybe went sideways due to a sudden trade policy?
Yeah, not so much sideways, but so we are building a warehouse in Harristown, Maryland. So I'm responsible for our global real estate portfolio. So all leases, all land, buildings that we own globally. And part of that is because of the stellar real estate background that I received at Fitzpatrick Lentz Bubba. I'll just give that little kick in there. But so we were about to close on this land, and we were working at the same time to negotiate a general contractor agreement. And this was end of January. So right around the time, right? Everything's coming up. All these tariffs are being announced, right? End of January, beginning of February. And the general contractor decides to throw in. So it's an AIA contract. He decides to throw in, we need tariff language in the contract, right? And he increases all of this. And we had worked on a budget with him for, months. We had it all done, all approved, the whole deal. And so to throw a kicker into all of this, we absolutely had to close on this property because we had learned that the property was in the path of the Indiana bat migration, which meant that the trees on the property had to be all removed before March 1st, or the end of March, I'm sorry, because from April 1 through November 1, you can't tear down any trees because the bats migrate, right? So we're like, okay, we got to get this done. And so, what we did was we came to something pretty reasonable, right? We said, look, at the end of the day, we're both going to pay something here for these tariffs. And so, as I said earlier, I'm not one to just say, no, you're stuck with it. You have to pay, right? We're going to work this through. So we said, okay, if you can attribute the increased cost to what you're paying across the board. So it's not just you, it's everything that's applying here, right? So everybody's affected. It's not just you purchasing, it's every purchaser who would purchase this product. We'll pay that increase, right? That's fine. We got that. And then our second one was, you need to document that. Like, we need to see that you actually paid that increase, right? Like, we're not just going to take your word for it. Like, show us. And everybody was good with that. And so I'm like, look, if you paid it and everybody would have paid it, fine, we'll pay it too. It's okay. You don't have to eat that cost, because at the end of the day, we got to live with this general contractor for a year, right? And so we don't want to start that relationship off really poorly, and they've got to build a building for us. And what they're going to do is they're going to throw in a whole lot of extra costs at the end just to make up that cost, right? And we had built in some excess in the budget just to cover this. So I think, right, if you have that kind of like work in, and right now, if you're doing a project or you're doing something, build something in there, right? And so in your contracts, right, no matter what you're doing, build a little bit of buffer in there, because you're likely going to have to pay something extra. You're likely going to have to eat some cost somewhere in some project. So if you build that in and just plan for it, it won't hurt so much.
That reminds me, so before this, I was talking to a friend who runs a large manufacturing company in the area, and he was saying, before tariff season came in, you were seeing price increases from suppliers. And so they hadn't hit with the tariffs yet, but they were just using it as a reason to increase, their revenue. And so, Kendra, I was wondering, what are some contracting strategies or terms that you can use to prepare for that sort of increase, to be ready for, trade increase like that?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about some of them already here. Force majeure. I think your exit strategy is important, understanding termination provisions, and if any of those termination provisions are tied to, I think, Elyse, maybe you brought this up, if you have a price increase, you have the opportunity to go back to the table. Having an exit strategy there could be a way to make it work. But Jen, to your point, these are suppliers that you have to work with, and often, particularly in complex supply chains, you're sometimes beholden to this contractor, because getting someone to meet the quality standards that, at least in the life sciences space, someone that meets those quality standards is you can't find anyone else that fits the bill. And so you have to work with them. Drafting a template that is so one-sided that, they see it and they're like, what the heck? That's not going to work. You need to find negotiation strategies and places in these different terms, the supply chain, force majeure, termination, that are going to work for everyone in the room. And I think that's really important. Exactly to your point with the general contractor. Keep people at the table. Sometimes you have to stay at the table and act reasonably, but keeping it fair for everyone involved is a part of that contracting strategy.
All right, Elyse, I have heard force majeure multiple times. Are there other, clauses or contractual mechanisms someone can use to kind of prepare themselves for this?
Yeah, and we talked about several of them. I think the price increases and, what exactly the content of that price adjustment provision looks like, I think is going to depend on your leverage. You may be able to get a unilateral price increase depending on the percentage tariff increase. You may be able to work out a formula, or the agreement to agree provision that we've talked about. I would say price increase is the main one, and there should be some fallbacks in there, like material adverse change, which specifically addresses your supply chain disruptions or sudden increases in the cost of inputs, and that ties with force majeure. So all of those would be helpful.
Tim, you talk about sort of the rise of protectionism and how we're seeing that. How can business leaders stay proactive instead of reactive? Tariffs kind of can't surprise everyone. What can leaders do to get ahead of this and be ready?
Well, we can only give legal advice, not necessarily business advice. So the things that we talked about today, looking over your contracts, being careful and addressing these issues when you get into new contracts, having a diversity of suppliers and customers, not all in one region. Those are the ones that our clients seem to be focused on.
I do want to give everyone a chance to ask questions, but before we turn it over, and was there anything that we didn't talk about that anyone would be beneficial for everyone?
I would just say this has come up with a couple of my clients recently, and I will say this isn't really, it's a risk that maybe Trump talked about it a bit when he was running, but that parties shouldn't have to bear this risk on their own. And so far in contract negotiations, most parties have been reasonable, but it's just important that you address the issue.
You haven't talked about the potential to manage your tariff payments by using a foreign trade zone. By importing your stuff into the foreign trade zone, you don't pay any duty when it comes in. You pay it when it comes out. So if you import it to the foreign trade zone in Lehigh Valley by the airport, and then you sell it to someone in Ohio, it's when the sale to Ohio takes place that you pay the duty. You can also potentially manage the duty amount by importing various components, assembling or manufacturing that thing within the foreign trade zone, paying the tariff on the finished product rather than paying the tariffs on the various components that have come in. So some companies can save money by doing that. Others just like to manage the timing of their payment of the tariffs by using the foreign trade zone. So you can still, it can be expensive to find space in the foreign trade zone, but you can potentially expand the existing zones around the various airports and ports wherever you happen to find them. So if you're looking for something along those lines, you can rent space, you can potentially build your own. It depends on what kind of investment you want to make, but that's something we had not touched on.
How large is the foreign trade zone in this area?
I have no idea.
Okay. Anything else before we turn it over for questions? Any questions?
Question. When that you worked with that contractor who agreed that any provable price increases you would bear, what was like the burden of proof that you agreed to use? And I think for some context, might have one component that comes from a foreign country that has a tariff applied to it, but a component that comparable, it comes from the U.S., but that U.S. supplier increases their price to match the market, not necessarily from a tariff charge. You can't show that receipt.
Yeah, so it was like, let me see if I have the language. So we said need reasonable documentation that increase related to assessment of tariffs. So it wasn't exactly the language that we used, but so it would have had to relate exactly, to the tariff increase itself, not just because, my competitor increased, so now I'm going to increase because I can. And so because we're buying from that supplier, now that increase there. So they'd have to document and show that because of the tariff applied to that product, that's why the price increase occurred. So, yeah. I will say this, we actually felt that we were pretty lucky because around that same time we were hearing that particularly not so much in, sort of up this part, but Florida area, and some other southern states, not only were they negotiating tariffs, they were also negotiating labor shortages. So because of immigration policies, there were contractors who were negotiating that if they lost employees and there was labor shortages, that you would cover the cost of increased labor. And so that one was not negotiated into our contract, thank God. But don't be surprised if, depending on different work or things like that, that comes up at some point because of the strong immigration policies, depending on where businesses are located.
Built to know for both of you, we're a med device company as well. Manufacturing Poland, Mexico, China, some in the US, also some Africa. Is anybody, are you advocating for your customers to get out of China? I was wondering if your companies.
So we're not. I mean, we have a pretty strong base in China. So I mean, we're not adding in China, but we're not moving away from China.
Our supply chain doesn't have a large impact in China. It's more where we're a distributor of a product that was manufactured in China is where we're seeing that impact. Olympus just does not have a large footprint there, so not a lot of movement on that front. In terms of, we're also not moving away from suppliers necessarily that are in China where we're distributing their product, though. So.
But I will say though that we try to shift where we ship the Chinese products. So it's not that we're necessarily always trying to ship China to US. We might be shipping in Europe or in other Southeast Asian countries, so that we're not distributing all around. Yeah.
That leads me to a question. The stated goals of these tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and to promote manufacturing in the U.S. To what extent have you changed your strategies, perhaps to bring more production into the U.S.?
Yeah, so we've been, look, we are all about manufacturing in the U.S. I will tell you, right, so we bought a manufacturing facility in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, which is about 3.5 hours north of here. And we're looking to expand. We've been looking to expand for a while. The biggest issue we have is there's not enough power. We don't have enough energy up there. And we have been working for 2+ years to try to figure out with the energy company what we need to do to get the energy capacity. We've been working with local government up there, state government, lobbyists, and we're getting closer. But it's a hard thing. We don't have enough power. And so it's, and it's not just there, it's other places too, right? And so, that's a challenge, for us. And, so different locations, then the other thing is too, right? We manufacture, right, steel iron. That process includes a DISA, which is like this big thing that no neighborhood's going to say, put this here, right? So we go around and try to find existing locations. There's not a lot that want to sell. So, bringing it to, the U.S. is a challenge. So it's hard to do that. It's hard to have those manufacturing jobs and just say, we would love to. We deal with Buy America and Buy American too on our jobs. And so we're dealing with that all of the time. And so the ability to manufacture more in the U.S. would be great. But there's just not always the practicality there to be able to do it.
Kendra, have you guys shifted your priorities or your focus at all?
Yeah, so Olympus does not currently have a large manufacturing activity in the U.S. They're a Japanese-based company, for those who don't know, and their manufacturing footprint is just very small here. And I'm not aware of any movements to come to the U.S. similar. The issues are, obviously the same as other folks, power, cost of labor, things like that. But simultaneously, the quality and having folks that can make these medical devices to the level of quality. It's a complex thing, and it's not an easy one to defeat to do.
It's a well-oiled machine in Japan.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I do have one.
Yeah.
And I think I know the answer, but we found that, our biggest clients are utilities, or we manufacture hydraulics for wind turbines, which that's another whole role that we're having issues. So our biggest clients are, besides the manufacturers of wind turbines, are utilities that actually use those wind turbines, right? And these are billion-dollar corporations, and we are 19 people. So we are not billion-dollar corporations. So negotiating with them is not really that easy. It's like, here, sign, But in a couple of cases, we found out that there are provisions in the contract where they say that things can change if there's a legal change, and in one case also there was if there were tax changes. I would presume that both of those cases are useful for me to tell them that move on this. I know.
I agree. I think it depends on the language, but both of those certainly give you that leverage to go to the negotiating table. And, if it's submitting a change order request or whatnot, they can be tedious as far as like the procedures that you need to do to advocate for that change, but it's certainly worthwhile.
Well, yeah, with this in particular, it does say, doesn't say taxes in this one that says legal. I think that we don't want to go that route. Obviously, we want to, generate good relationship. And we know that they are giving us a lot of business because they love the way we work. So I think that is our biggest leverage, more than just whatever the contract says. Mm-hmm. But, they're ready to us that they are not going to accept anything. But I think
So I've tried like an addendum, right? So you identify your key points for companies like that.
Yeah, here's my argument to that always, right? You want me to sign that, and you're not going to accept any changes. So what if I can't agree to all of this? What if I can't comply with all of this? You want a contract that we can both comply with, right? That we both can come to the table, that we can agree to. And of course, right, they're going to want their indemnity provisions. They're going to want all of the stuff that comes with that. But there's got to be some give and take in a contract. And I absolutely hate when somebody comes to the table and says, well, everybody else has signed this. Why won't you? I don't agree. I'm like, that's great that they've signed that for you. I bet they didn't read it. And so, I always push back, always. And look, you can do it in a nice way and just say, look, consider these. Consider just these items and pick 3. Pick your top 3 important ones and just say, I'd like you to consider these.
Well, right. What we are going to do, I think, is that because they don't give us all the business, they just give us partial. Obviously, they want to have a diversified supply chain. So we are going to go, well, the less you give me, but then give me more business. Mm-hmm. So at least we do it in quantity, and therefore I can compensate. And we'll see. That is our biggest strategy. Number 1 is try to partner.
Sure.
That
but everything's negotiable.
Yeah.
Everything's negotiable in the contract. I mean, there's, that is the standard. I don't want to get an attorney involved. I don't want to deal with this. I just want you to sign this, and I want to check it off my list and be done. All it is.
Great. I don't want to keep anyone from whatever's out there. So I think the team will be here afterwards. If you have any questions, you can ask them. But I want to thank you guys for coming here. This was a great panel, and thank everyone for coming out.
Thanks.
All right, so real quick, Corey. So we have an appetizers out here. So these up yourselves again, and they're going to be bringing them up for 10 use. So you guys are well ordered, right? It's on us. Thanks for coming out tonight. So 1 or 2 ways to order drink. One would be to flag down one of the servers that's up here. Also, if you want to go down to the bar just to move your legs a little bit, get us out of your seat, just let them know it's for the event upstairs so they can put it on our chat. Okay? Thank you everybody for coming. And if you turn in your name tags before you go, if you forget, don't worry about it. But thank you for coming.
Thank you.